talk about accessibility, we usually talk about how easy something is to access. You can talk about accessibility generally, or you can be specific. For example, is that building wheelchair accessible? Accessibility to me means a lot of things. It means equity and it means inclusion. It means people are not being told that they can be left out of things just because they're different. It's also meeting people where they are and giving them the accommodations that they need.
So, accessibility is the way or the means of something being able to be used by everyone. It might be something that can be easily obtained.
The capability of being used or being within reach, something that can be used by a person who is not disabled can still be used by a person who is disabled. I would really like to see more of a conversation around the importance of accessibility in like government buildings and buildings that are usable for everyone, and especially settings that are for everyone like schools and work environments. I really think that more needs to be spoken about, how accessibility is not something that should be an afterthought, but more of a mindful and front of the brain conversation.
Media really influences how a lot of people think, and I think more representation in the media of disabilities and more education in the media about accessibility could really change our perspectives and shift the conversation more towards inclusion.
There should be a higher consciousness of people with disabilities, whether it be physical, whether it be cognitive. There are very different ways that things are not accessible for certain individuals' conditions. Up that awareness, and yes, we do have the different months that bring awareness too, but there can be more ads, there could be more representation in the media, there could be more ad. It's just like a daily battle that still needs to be worked on.
Yes, I have encountered ableism because I am physically impaired. I have cerebral palsy, and one instance, for example, is at the college that I was at before I came to Berkeley was very inaccessible, and before I had come to that school, the people who worked there and the people who wanted my admittance and my ability to be committed to that school told me that I would be able to get the resources that I needed in terms of accessibility. And after I had arrived there, it was not what they had promised me, and what they had promised me was not possible. That was a very difficult experience, but it made me realize the importance of accessibility for myself and for other people.
Ableism is all around us, and many of us are ableist without even meaning to be. I remember I used to live on the street, and there used to be a park on one side. And there was this group of men, and they were all friends, and they all had some level of an amputation previously, and many were non-ambulatory and were in wheelchairs. They would always come up our street to go to the park, but they would always have to come up the middle of our street. And that's because the sidewalks with the signposts were not wide enough for wheelchairs to go through. And that's just one example of ableism that people face on a daily basis. I think one of the most important ways in which allies advocate is by impacting change in their own communities and in their own families, and that's extremely important. And I think the way to be helpful is to keep doing what people are doing, and that is listening to disability advocates and listening to disabled people themselves and what they need.
I have seen people in their posters, or better said advertisements for shows, saying whether there is or is not a ramp for someone that's physically disabled, or what accommodations the venue has.
Ways that I see allies advocating for accessibility is, for example, Instagram. I think about 2 years ago, they put on this accessibility feature where you can write alternative text that describes your picture that you post for people with visual impairments. And I, for one, wish they talked about this more because I had only figured that out recently. I think it's really cool and nice for social media to be promoting more accessible ways to enjoy what other people browse. Another way that I see allies advocating is the use of sharing people's posts about ableism that they experience, and how sharing other people's experiences of ableism can open people's eyes and open people's ears to listening and help others who may not experience ableism firsthand understand how important of an issue it is to people who experience it.
In Puerto Rico, at least with the younger generation, they are doing what I said in my previous answer, how certain venues may or may not have certain accessibility services. A couple of friends that are part of the deaf community, and they're definite advocates to bring awareness to such and how their community needs certain things more on the island. I think as a whole, we are not doing a great job. It's we're aware, but we're not taking enough action to help people.
Attitudes towards disability are somewhat similar where I grew up, although there seems to be a lot more fear involved. In terms of accessibility, India, in my experience personally, as someone who grew up privileged, has been about as accessible as the United States, where many places have elevators and other things to make them accessible, but many places do not.
Every individual on this earth is very different. They need different services, so definitely there needs to be more awareness. There needs to be more people talking about it, having this conversation.
As a person who experiences mobility problems and inaccessibility quite frequently, especially living in a city, I just really think that when someone opens up to you about how they feel and experience they are putting themselves in is inaccessible to them, you have to listen. I also think that the best way to listen is to say, hey, I might not know how you're feeling, and I might not know how this would make me feel if I were to go through it, but I'm going to listen to you because your view is important and your problems are important. And then is able to fully listen to another person about their struggles with inaccessibility and ableism. That is where a beneficial conversation begins, because someone else who may not be experiencing the same thing as them is open to learning and is open to spreading the knowledge that they now obtain to help other people receive a more accessible life. Sometimes you really need to ask the questions and really, really push yourself to learn so you don't have to be misinformed.
What also needs to happen is that people need to confront their internal biases and help their community members and family members do the same. The toxic cycle of ableism starts at home. When we break that cycle, we effectively stop it, and we make sure that people move forward in a more educated and kind way. Even if you can push your community, no matter how big or little, towards being more inclusive, that's one step towards the greater goal, which is making sure society is moving towards being more inclusive.